Now that our concept is prepared, it's time to start modeling. Our goal now is to take the sketch we made and translate it into 3D. We're going to use a variety of techniques to get us there, such as box modeling, modeling from plane, symmetry, important tools like cut, connect, extrude, and more. In this tutorial, I'll be using my LT 2018. Let's get started here. First off, I'm going to make a plane, and I'm just going to apply the concept to the plane. I like using the plane to kind of draw from, to be able to see it in the background where I want, and then also use it as a, kind of jumping off point for some of the shapes, because I will duplicate the plane and then use the cut tool to take stuff out of it. So as of right now, let's just get that on there. Apply new material. And then we'll just grab it from wherever we saved it. Now in this case, I knew the proportions were 500 pixels by 700 pixels, so I made the proportions of the plane 50 by 70, so same dimensions as the concept itself. That way we know it's the right proportions visually here. So it's kind of off center here, so what we can do, I'll go in here, you notice the plane doesn't exactly match. In this case, we can either use, I believe, normalize or unitize, or in this case, I'm just going to use X to snap to the grid and then just drag these out. That way it forms the perfect UV space. And then within our scene, it's the proper proportions. So remember to save your work as you work along. I already named mine, so I'm just hitting Control S here to make sure our progress gets saved. So let's start modeling this guy. So one thing I like to do when approaching something with many pieces is to just do a bunch of pieces individually and then kind of place them. So like make the sword and make the shield and then place them in the proper spot afterwards. Plus it's a lot easier just modeling flat. Okay, so here let's just block in the kind of the arms and foot, whatever, his post. Let's do that real quick. Let's get some cylinders on there. In this case, I'm not going to go crazy high poly. Let's just do 8. 8 should be plenty. Let's do the front view. So one thing we could do, transparency wise, we could either use this button up here, but it's going to dim the concept too. So I'm just going to give this guy a custom material real quick and change the transparency here. I'm going to call this, just for my own sake, see-through. We can adjust that transparency however we want. So let's apply it. So sign. Okay, cool. Here. What is going on? Come on, transparency. Do it. There we go. So it didn't apply the first time I clicked it. Maybe I didn't click it properly. I'm not sure. In this case, let's make sure we have the right. There we go. So we have the right one applied. It's transparent. All good. Now in this case, let's just start getting those proportions in. Because I have this plane back here, it makes it really easy for us to just kind of follow our guide. And if we want it more see-through, we could just drag the transparency slider. And it seems like it's not updating for some weird reason or another. But we could see through it, so we're kind of happy with that. Strange. It looks like it's doing it. It's just a little, laggy. All right. But it should update in real time. Not quite sure why it's not doing it for me here. That's how you get that working. Let's see. In this case, we can just copy or duplicate, and we'll use this for the arms too. And remember, when you have things that are polygons that aren't going to be seen, you could feel free to delete them. So like these interfaces here, we'll make sure that we go and get rid of those. Now with this, obviously, it's going to go up higher. I need to keep that into account. Move that up. This guy we could just clone over, but we'll do that in a minute. Let's go back to our regular view. We'll go back to perspective. Here we are. Now I'm just going to get rid of those interfaces. As well as pull this guy out a little. Just so we get that roundedness there. And now remember, in this case, we're not going to see the bottom of this either. So we're going to go ahead and convert that vert to polygons, get rid of it. And we're just going to freeze the transforms for good measure. Okay. Now with this one, we can use an instance in the meantime. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate special. We want an instance, and I'm just going to scale this. It looks like red on the x-axis, -1, duplicate special. Okay, now it duplicated in place. It duplicated based on where the pivot is. So what I can do, select that again, and I'm going to move the pivot using D and X, the hotkeys. There'll be another video going over all this stuff too, the things I'm doing kind of quickly. If you're not familiar with, for instance, how to move the pivot properly or how to do instances, that kind of stuff, there'll be a video that you could watch to kind of get you up to speed with some of these techniques that I'm using. So don't fret. We'll link it down below as well. So let's try that again. I'm going to repeat it. I don't have to put in new inputs because these should work now that I've changed the pivot point. And there we go. Now in this case, maybe they're a little too transparent. So I'm going to make them a little less transparent here. A little more opaque. Again, it's not updating properly for some reason. It's kind of throwing me off. Try a different one. That's working just fine. Number 2 is our texture. Okay. So for some reason, if that's happening to you, there's a way to get around it. Normally it will work right away. I didn't want to really cut this part because I want you guys to see some troubleshooting when necessary. So I'm just kind of going back and forth, noticing that it's not updating in real time. And maybe there's a button I pressed somewhere, but in the meantime, that's one way around it. So now that we got those in place, I'm just going to make a layer. And actually, I'll just leave it called layer right now. That way I can just hide those. And so other stuff I want to block out. Not go too crazy right now, but his body, for instance. So let's go ahead and grab a couple things. So first, let's grab his tabard. So I'm going to duplicate, like I was saying before. We could just model in front of it. But in this case, I'm going to duplicate it. I'll isolate it, which you have a handy button up here. I have it hotkeyed. You press that to isolate your current selected object. And now I'm just going to go in to multi-cut and just chop that baby out. Now multi-cut, I always make sure to start on an edge and end on an edge before you're accepting the cut, as it were. We're just going to trace this. Something like this we might be able to make symmetrical as well, but if we do, we'll want to make sure to make it unique later on. But for now, I'm just kind of cutting. So in that case, I'm going to end on the edge, like I was saying, an outer edge here. Otherwise, it has trouble kind of accepting what you cut. So there we go. And now I could go in and be a little more exact with these. So I'll start there. Now I'm pressing right click to kind of confirm these cuts. And that's kind of all we need at this point. So what I'm going to do, I'll just select the faces, get rid of those. And I like to connect the edges in the meantime so I have geometry that I can manipulate more easily. So I'm just going to select these and can kind of connect them. We'll do one down the middle too. So across here, we got to use multi-cut. All right, so in this case, now I have in the right location the tabard, and we're going to want to give this thing a little volume, and we can go in, because this is just a block out right now, we can go in and finesse a little more of this later. But I'm just going to kind of round it out for now. And then obviously this will get a little more definition as we go on. So same thing, I'm going to add it to that layer just to get it out of the way. And then again, I'll copy this and we're going to use it for the volume of the body. Same idea here. Get rid of the other stuff. Then connect. I'm also going to be cutting this. Because we know we're going to have to bend it in those areas later, right? Because it's going to have kind of a cylindrical-ish, torso-like shape. And then I'll do one down the middle for good measure. And I'm going to actually just extrude this. So we'll take this as a base, extrude, pull it out a bit. We could finesse the volume of it, the mass of it, a little later. So one thing I'll do just to kind of save time right now, is I'm going to grab this whole edge loop, this ring as it were, and just scale it down, right? This is probably going to have some kind of shape like that, where it's not going to be completely blocky. It'll probably, in this case too, we'll select that loop and scale it out. That way it's getting, again, like a rounder shape. And we can play with these more and more as we decide to finesse the shape of the torso into what it'll eventually become. In this video, we're not going to do any sculpting. This is all just straight up good old hand modeling. All right, that's good enough for now. Remember, our goal is blocking this stuff out, and then we could go in and start really doing the proportions proper. So there we go. So next, we could block in, for instance, let's do the sword. It should be simple enough. This one, I might not do the exact proportions because I want to build it straight up and down. We could, I believe, I could show you, you know what, we could go and see one way to do that. Yeah, why not? We'll give it a shot. Normally, you could just have it flat And so in this case, I'm just going to rotate this. Let's see. Just kind of having some fun here. There's one way I might troubleshoot this. If you wanted to, instead of drawing it flat, you could always take this and then rotate it and get it to something kind of similar, right? See how that's like basically down the middle. Now I drew this in perspective too, which means there's going to be, see, we have width on this side, but we could kind of fake it by, scaling it a little wider than we see here. This is if we want to really be accurate. For something like this, don't feel any pressure to have to make it exact, but that's one trick you can do. Maya also has a line tool that's handy for snapping faces to other faces that you can do. We'll go over that another time. But it's out there. Kind of like the idea of this having some kind of wonkiness to it. So you'll see me not try to make it perfect. We'll give it a little character. And we'll likely do a pass later on too to make things a little more wonky. But it's up to you when and how much you want to do that. It's kind of personal taste. Or depending if you're working off of someone else's style or under a director, what the art direction is. So here we go. Now for a lot of weapons too, you can typically cut it right down the middle and then use symmetry to get them to be exactly the same. But in this case, I'm okay with it kind of being unique, so I'm going to get rid of that. Oopsies. Let's connect. And once we see it in 3D too, feel free to change it from the concept if you've decided you like it better a different way. There's no shame in that. Unless, again, you're being directed to specifically hit something on target, you should feel free to kind of inject your own creativity into whatever you're making. All right, so here I'm going to extrude it. And I'm actually going to separate this into pieces. Because, see, we could all do it in one piece, and I could do something like extrude these again to get a little more dimension. But then we wind up with a lot of extra polys that we'd have to cut down, that we might not want to have to deal with. There's a whole lot of ways you can handle it. But in this case, I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to make it into multiple pieces. So we're going to take this handle, we're going to make this one. So in this case, I'm going to do this by just adding a loop and deleting in between. You could always just use the detach tool, and that will work just fine too. But I'm kind of going about a little lazy way here, but it's quick enough that I don't feel bad. Now shift and double clicking will select the full ring there, so we can get rid of that. And double clicking in general will select an element. So those are good little shortcuts. Here we go. So now we have separate pieces for this. So what does that mean? Well, right away, I can collapse this whole thing. Let's see here. Looks like we got some extra polys. So I'm going to just merge vertices real quick. So let's see. Yeah, there's some extra polys in there from I didn't completely undo the extrude we did. So I'm just going to merge those real quick. All right, they're gone. I can merge these to center. You could target weld, whatever your preferred method is. But basically the idea is I'm just getting rid of this loop, so it's just one poly. And we could have created this in individual pieces to begin with if we wanted, but you can kind of go whatever you're most comfortable with. Point is there's options. Here's some of them. Get this guy. Get some angle. And we're just going to have these intersect with each other. So now no longer do we need to actually make the geo connect at every point. Funny enough, this is actually one of the things I struggled with when I was first learning 3D modeling, is I was always so concerned with every edge loop and every vert kind of going into another vert. And I didn't realize you could just float things inside of other meshes like this. And so once I learned that, I was like, oh, okay, that's not so bad, you know? And so I was really happy to hear that. So I don't know, maybe there's one of you out there that was unsure about that. But no, it's safe. Okay. Just kind of getting rough proportions in. We don't have to go too crazy right now, but bridge these. Oops. Bridge. Or we could fill hole. Either one works just fine. Now chances are we'll come back to the shape with a little more detail later on, but for something like this where our focus is mostly going to be texturing, you can honestly get away with just this too. So we'll make that decision a little further along. There'll be some things like maybe we want to cut out that shape, and so those are the kind of things we could come back and play with. Okay, so now we have that, and again I could just put that to the side. And I'm going to add that to our bucket. This is just our bucket of shapes that we made already. Maybe I'll move this forward, get this back. Now with these, you could probably we'll just get the regular material on them. Same with these. So next, let's see, what other parts do we have? We want to block in the head, the shoulders, the helm, the shield, and then maybe the rocks, just to get them in there. We can go ahead and hide these again. Let's just do the shield. The shield we'll do a little differently. Gonna drag out a plane, and we're just gonna chop it up. And we're only gonna do half of it in this case. So I'm gonna start by putting a cut down the middle. Go to my multi-cut and just try to mimic that shape the best I can. There we go. I'm going to get rid of the rest, and I'm just going to mirror that. And maybe we could use instancing here too. See if that still works. Maybe it has our data from before. Duplicate special. There it is. Now I can go in and make some cuts. And they'll be there on the other side. Let's go ahead, we'll combine that. merge the verts. And now we could do something like extrude the whole thing. So I'm going to just finesse the shape here just a little. There we go. Let's see, so I'm going to extrude it out. Looks good. And then we'll put this one back inwards. Maybe scale it a little. We have like a little bevel. There we go. And now one thing I could have done was connect these lines sooner. That way they'd be on the back, but it's not too much right now, so we'll just do that. But if you have a lot more verts, it might be smart to go ahead and kind of connect these ahead of time, so that way they'll be on the back when we extrude. There we go. So the thing about that, I know I just kind of went and did all that, but you actually don't need those either. Unless you're going to extrude inwards, we can just get rid of these. So I'm just going to select these edges. And I'm going to do Control Backspace, I think. Gets rid of verts and edges, but we got a couple here connected differently, so I'll do those separate. There we go. And now the back is pretty clean. We could do some connecting here if we want, just to make it look pretty. Might get rid of those later if we decide not to have it curve or bend on the bottom, because we typically only want geo where geo is doing something for us. So we'll see if we want to curve it or not. Otherwise, we'll go and clean it up later and kind of optimize the shape. So let's see. So for now, that's good. Later, we might taper it a little more. Pardon me. To give it a little more character, because generally you don't want things like perfectly straight. But for now, this should be fine. Just gonna taper this a little more though on the front. And then perhaps, let's see here. We can do that right now. I kind of want this thing to be curved too. So kind of like that. So, but I want it a little rounder. So we already have divisions down here. I'm gonna go ahead and we'll put in some up here. So just using the connect tool. Let's see. I'll do a little more. Connect tool, and then also by constraining it to this edge, we can move it so that way it's perfectly up and down. Not completely necessary, but let's go ahead and do it by using the transform constraints, edge slide. And now when we move this, it's going to stay on that edge. So that's pretty handy. It's good to know, so I wanted to show you guys. Now we can just move that into a place where it looks roughly vertical. And I can add one more set. That's evenly spaced. Now let's do that with the other half too. But we'll just copy it over. But before we do that, I'm going to grab this, turn on soft select by pressing B, and then you could hold B and drag to change the dimension of it, and make sure we turn off our transform constraint, and we can kind of get some bend in there. So in this case, not so hot, right? Do the other end, but we need those loops on the back. So let's go ahead, do ourselves a favor. Save. This sometimes it can crash, and then we'll add the loops. Boop, boop. Cool. We'll turn soft select on. just give it a slight curve. Just enough that it's not so boring and flat. And then also rotate this edge. That's another thing you could have done, is move your pivot here and then just rotate, and you'll also get this actually facing a little nicer. You have options when doing this stuff. Just looking for a subtle curve there. There we go. Let's copy that. Duplicate. In this case, instead of using duplicate special, I'm just going to go ahead, negative scale on X. Then we're going to combine them and merge vertices. I'll do that pretty often. We're on duplicate, change the scale, combine, and merge verts. You can just use symmetry. For some reason, I got used to doing it the other way. But you know, if symmetry is easier for you, go ahead and do that. Let's see. It's been a while since I used it, so I'm like, where is symmetry? I believe it might be, yeah, symmetrize. I don't think that's it. Called something else in I think. Mirror. So you use mirror, and that'll do the job as well. So there we go. We have a basic shape we could use for that, and that kind of looks like that right now. And we'll put this in our bucket as well. And now for what we're doing, we'll decide whether or not we want to put those bolts in, or if we just want to paint them in. This thing overall is going to be fairly low poly because all our detail is going to be going in the texture. But if we think it'd be fun to have a little chunkier elements, then we should feel compelled to add them where we think they're going to make the most impact. A lot of that can be preference, but it also comes from experience of knowing, you know, what really shows up the most. Also, how far you're going to be viewing it from, right? Are you going to do a really big image? A really small one? Is it going to be in the background? That kind of stuff. It's all good to keep in mind. So here I'm just kind of flattening these out because I've decided for now we're not going to bend it. So we don't really need these loops here. It's important to pay attention to additional verts and edges and whatnot, because as you get to start putting this stuff in games, it's all going to add up, and so you want it to be as economical as you can within reason. So for instance, I could probably collapse these and really just make it one. For now, we'll keep it smoother, but that is definitely an option. It's just being like this, okay, it's still round, it still gets the job done, but I'm opting for something a little smoother for now. So just be aware of the polys that you're adding and what they're actually doing to your object, your asset. So put that away. All right, what's another one? Might as well just do the rocks. Get it out of the way. You don't have to do these in any particular order if you don't want, unless there's something you kind of really want to tackle first. So I'm just kind of going through these piece by piece. And for something like this, no, it's not like super important that the rocks match the same shape. Since I drew it that way, I'm kind of like, you know, we'll make it match. But feel free to do whatever shape, you know, that compels you. Extrude them. And however you want to handle these in the three-dimensional space, go wild. I'm going to keep it pretty simple, I think. Nothing you do right now has to be, pardon my pun, set in stone. As you do more of the piece and see everything start to come together, that'll inform future decisions that you're going to make. And so you shouldn't feel like you're really completely tied down to whatever choices you make right now. And with rocks especially, you can just kind of do hard edges too. to see it in fun, faceted form. You know, because they're rocks. They'll be sharp. Some of them. So I just like seeing the facets personally. I think it's fun. Reminds me of old school, low poly stuff. So there we go. We got some rocks there to kind of hang out. I'm going to flatten the bottoms though. Pretend there's a floor there. We could maybe add one later. We'll see. See how we feel. There we go. Same thing. Toss them in the bucket. All right, a couple more pieces. Let's do the shoulders. Simple enough. We're just going to start with a cylinder for these. Let's see, maybe we'll do, see what 10 sides look like. That should be good. Just edit it more later if we want. In this case, rotate it so we have flat edge along our grid, like that. Get rid of those. Get rid of those. Extrude these, and then we're just going to do an inset. So what I do to inset in Maya is I kind of do an extrude, and I'll just use, was it offset? There we go. So if you use 3D Max, usually insetting. So they're pretty thick trims. We'll do that. We'll go with like 3. And then in this case, we'll make the outside thicker. We're just going to select that loop. Extrude again. Pop that bad boy out. And I'm going to scale this down just to give it a little taper. So stuff like scaling once you do these, unless you need it to be perfectly angled, I just like giving it a little taper. And then maybe I'll lift it up a little so it happens down here. Now let's get rid of this extra loop. There we go. Now something like this, we might have to pull them down a little more, right? Maybe I should have pulled this down more, right? So if we have it on the shoulders, we'll see how it feels, but these look like it should actually be much further down, huh? For example, like down to there. What can we do there? Let's get close to that shape right now. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull a little further. Let's add some connections here. We'll double click to select those. And we're just going to pull it up, scale it. See if we get something we like. And in this case, I kind of want there to be a cut in the middle. We'll do that. And maybe we can scale. Or in this case, we'll just move it down to get that roundness. And then just use the move tool a little. We can do the same thing as before, where we get rid of one side. Say, hey, let's get this side to a point that I like it a little better. Like the shield. So there we go. Even though we didn't get it perfect the first time with the cylinder, we took a look and we were like, hey, you know what? Let's get it a little closer and make some quick edits. Didn't take too long, and we got to a place that we were happier with. It's good to be able to do just straight up poly modeling and geo edits, even if something goes a little wrong. Now we'll duplicate it again. This time I'm going to do it on the Z. Whoop. Not the Z. Let's see. Oh, you got to freeze my transforms first. Then duplicate on the Z. I had transform information, so you got to make sure that you clear your transforms. I believe you could go modify, freeze transformations. This one I use constantly, so either have it on the hotkey or on your shelf. But modify, freeze transformations, super useful. Also, make sure that you freeze when you see a negative or your normals are going to be flipped. But in this case, I'm merging it, so it'll get fixed by itself. So I combine those things, merge the verts, and now we have that as one piece again. So we can see how that looks and feels. Combine, merge. Once we put it on this guy. But for now, we're going to toss this in our bucket too. Let's scale this out just a tad. Boop, pop. Did I make two of them? Oh, I think I duplicated it twice. That's why. That's okay. We'll get rid of one. Bucket. All right. Now, speaking of buckets, we actually have a bucket on his head. So why don't we go ahead and just block that in, since we're talking so much about buckets. And start again with the cylinder. Let me deselect my object, cylinder. Now in this case, you might want a little more detail. Let's see what 12 sides looks like. Should be okay. Maybe 14. Is probably more than enough, but I like the roundness and kind of looking at where the face hole comes out, and so I could just grab these four and get rid of them, and the rest should be fine. Let's see. Should be these four. What do we want to do here? I think we should go with the higher amount, just because that might look too blocky. It can work. It can work just fine, but in this case, we'll air higher, and then if we want to collapse a couple later, it'll be easy enough. So let's just follow that shape of the bucket. So we know it's a little tapered, and we know it's missing the pieces down here. So in this case, I'm actually going to get rid of both of the top and the bottom and leave it hollow, and then we're going to add that back in a little later, the top part, because the top part is closed off. But what we can do, I'm going to taper it a little. Now I'm going to get rid of those pieces, those missing planks. Those face can kind of sit through. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to extrude this. I'm going to delete history real quick. And let's just extrude this guy. So what happens if you're extruding the way that you want and it's kind of looking like that, that just means your normals are flipped. So you go ahead and flip them back. So mesh display reverse. And that way it's proper. You don't have to like redo and scale your thing and then extrude again. It should work just fine doing it this way. And so now we have the thickness all around the bucket. And thickness is looking pretty good. Maybe a little too thick. If you want to scale it back, you can either undo what you had, or let's try one other thing. Should be able to go to, it's called, where is it? Transform. So edit mesh, transform. And this will let you kind of do like a push modifier thing. It's going to go along the object's normal. So if you want to make something thicker, if you're using Max, you're familiar with the push modifier, it's like that. So it'll translate along the normal. So in this case, we could just make it a little less thick. So it was that. Maybe we want somewhere in between. There we go. There's this, and now it's like that. So boom. And we can just go back to our move tool to bake that in. Now, I like that taper that it's having, so I'm going to add one more cut and taper it out just a little more. We have that nice kind of profile. Now, let's add the part that that kind of went missing here, right? So we could either add more geo and plop it in there, or let's see here, another option you have. You take, let's see, how do we want to do it? We could take this, make a copy of it, and then just collapse the inside. And then there we go, we have a lid. So chances are we won't be seeing underneath. We can make a copy of that later if we wind up seeing the bottom side, like if it's missing. But for now, we'll just do the top. And there we go. We now have the bucket head. So in this case, it looks a little taller in the drawing, so I'm going to just pull it up a little. And there's one more thing going on there. Let's add that so we can do the same thing. We'll grab these and we'll make a copy of this. And we'll get that little extra ridge. Now in this case, it has a little taper to it, but I don't mind. We could just scale it out a little. Now, quick tip reminder is when you're scaling on one of these, it's not doing anything for you. You hold control, it'll scale on both the other axes. So if you see the blue and the red, now they're moving because I'm holding control. So you get to scale a little differently with those handles. It'll be really useful. Sometimes it'll be weird if you're doing it on the wrong axis. But there you go. Pull this in. And I'm going to extrude that as well. There we go. And we can decide later, again, if we want those bolts. Or if we want this lower poly, we might decide that we want it lower poly. But I think it should be fine. It's a little high poly right now, but still has a little chunkiness to it, right? Okay. Now what do we say about these? Right, the bucket will also go in the bucket. Now we have a couple pieces left. We have the head, and I suppose the neck, and this little leaf feather thing. So I'm going to do that real quick, just because it's easy. Might as well. Remember, I have to end on the outside edge because it won't let me really connect it to that. You could try. There we go. Get rid of the rest. Pull some of these in a little closer. And then connect. So maybe we want to add one more. Kick it out a little. Let's see. We'll see. We'll see how we feel about that. There we go. And now you give it a little dimension right now for fun, and then we'll give it some thickness a little later. Let me just use the soft select to pull it out a little. Let's get the head in there now. So with the head, let's see. I'm probably just going to start with a cylinder or a sphere. Let's go with the cylinder. That's selected. All right, cylinder. Just going to want to get like this tapered shape, this head-like shape, if you will. We can do the same thing if we want to go to the front view and I'll line it up just to get the proper scale. I'm going to build this thing kind of with the middle on the grid. So it might not match the background exactly. But this way I can mirror it later if we want a texture, some parts of it mirrored. Pop our other material on there. Have one more here. There we go. All right, and then we need a kind of a neck too. I'll give him one of those, that little post. Just gonna kind of give him a little chin here. We'll see. We'll see how it works. Okay. So neck time. Let's put another cylinder. Probably not going to see inside of it, so let's get rid of that. Top and the bottom. You probably noticed me hitting these two buttons up here. It's just deleting the history. I only have to do it every now and then just because Maya will sometimes cause issues if your history gets built up too much. It's just kind of a habit I learned when I was first learning Maya. You might not even have to do it anymore, and it's 2018. But if you're curious, it's under Edit, Delete All by Type History. If you want to do it for all objects, or Delete by Type History for one object. You'll notice when you do commands, it kind of builds up in here, and you can kind of look at them. And if there was an edit, like an extrude, you could like change the extrude value. But it's all kind of wonky. I would look into it more if you're interested in the history in Maya. But my practice is basically just clearing it every once in a while to make sure no funny stuff happens. And sometimes you'll see it delete like these nodes that have transforms that you no longer need. If it doesn't, and it's kind of cluttering up your scene, you can just kind of select them and just delete. I would clear history first though, because sometimes there'll be an associated like scale or move, and if you delete that and your history is active, it might do funky stuff. So it's just to be aware of that. So looks like now that we see we've emptied our bucket here in the scene. Some stuff is really big because we didn't use the scale ref, but in this case, we could just kind of start fitting it. And then we'll get real with it more soon. Or see some stuff I want to change. There we go. The rocks down there, shoulder pads. There'll be 2 of them. I'll leave it straight for now. Let's see, and then the shield is in him as well. There we go. We got a lot of these pieces. What you could do if you want to visualize it a little better, but still work on it like this, one tip is to make a instance of it. So we're going to go back into the duplicate special, the little options block here, and just change the scale back to just regular 1. So basically everything's default, and hit duplicate special, and then you're going to get an instance. And now anything you edit is going to happen to the other one too. So where this is useful is by rotating this now and putting this in place. Sometimes it can be hard to do edits you want with skewed objects, right? But now we can say, oh, I want this longer, or just scale it less. You can do that pretty easily. So you can have your main one off to the side, and then an instance of it where you want. Same with this. We can go ahead and duplicate special. Do our rotate and whatnot. Then if we want to add the handle to that, we can add it afterwards. Kind of fit it to this guy's arm. But there we go. And then again, you could edit either one of them too, which is nice. So we're starting to get the model. We're starting to get him there. Blocked out a lot of it. Let's see. Pretty cute already. Stuff like the helmet too, we're going to want to angle back. Give him a little more of an arch overall. Let's see. Body, some arms. Shoulder pad, tabard thing we're going to want on both sides. His head is looking a little low, so let's check it from that front view. Do one more thing right now. We're going to go ahead and see how it lines up. For instance, the head here, a little low. And then this is having a problem where the back of it is the same height as the front, when in reality there should be kind of a slope there. We can see the neck and everything going on there. Let's do that real quick. We're going to grab these. We're just going to lower it, right? Because we still want to keep even fake dummy anatomy in mind. And we can start if we want faking some of the rest of his lumpy shape. You know, if it's a sack or something, maybe it has a belly. There we go. All right, so we got to start doing the belt as well as start finessing these shapes to kind of match what we got there a little better before we can even think about texturing it. Let's do that next. All right, let's continue with the model. So in this case, I know I wanted to do the belt as well as finesse the rest of his body and get all those pieces in there, right? So let's continue with that. With the belt, I think I'm going to start and let's just use a cylinder for that. Nice and easy. Go ahead and hide that side panel. Just give us a little more breathing room here. Actually, at this point, we don't even need any of these. Mixture of the move tool and soft select, we can get pretty decent shape around him. There we go. Playing with the fall off curve here in soft selection can be nice if it's not playing how you want it to originally. Those options, if you just double click the move tool over here, you'll be able to get to that. Then the drop down. Okay. I'm going to get that out of the way temporarily. Just by putting some of this stuff on another layer. You could just hide it as well with the visibility, but put in a toggle there. Personal preference as far as that goes. Now, I think I'm going to re-symmetry this guy real quick. By deleting half and copying the other half over. Just combining and merging the verts. You could use symmetry tools and stuff. All that works fine. see if I can turn this on here. There we go. Get some symmetry going in this guy. Extrude that, give it some thickness. It's going the wrong way though, so we're just gonna select all those and then reverse the normals. So if you ever see the normals looking black like that, it just means they're facing the wrong way. Or if they're invisible too, then you have back faces turned off. Right. It's going to be invisible, so we don't really have to worry about that. But I want to get this underside out of the way for now, so we can just finesse the edges here of his skirt. And then we could do that with alpha right here. So if it's missing pieces back there, we can just use an alpha map to kind of hide that. And if we decide later that we want to actually model it in, we could do that too. But since it's like a lower poly thing, I'm thinking alpha might work pretty well. Now, a lot of this isn't going to matter a tremendous amount because it's going to be hidden by so many things, but I still want to get it in there decently, the underneath proportions. There's no harm in doing that. Leave that. We'll put in an edge there to socket the arm. Then let's go ahead and make that belt buckle. In my history, make sure you're saving. All right, now belt buckle wise, let's just go ahead and start with a plane. Center it. And we'll just extrude. Delete those extra planes there. Now we can extrude that again, but I'm going to get the shape a little closer in the right spot first. Now it doesn't necessarily have to function like a proper buckle, right? In this case, we're just kind of doing it for the looks. So if you want, you could have one wrap around. In this case, I'm probably just going to have it float on top just to get the look. Cheating a little, but you know. As long as it sells the idea. There you go. Got a little buckle on them. And now we probably want to get the overhang, the cloak thing back on there, tabard, and have that look a little more accurate there. Get this stuff out of the way again for now. Let's go ahead and fit this to him a little better. I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm just going to symmetry it. That way I can use the symmetry tools. All right. Let's start molding this onto this guy. And one thing we could probably do afterwards is symmetry this front to back as well, and then just edit the back separate. Let's go ahead and pull this in. And we want to fit snugly inside the belt, right? So we might have to pull the belt out, but chances are the belt, when you put a belt on, right, like pulls stuff together towards you. So we'll try to fit this stuff in here. Maybe I'll thin out his chest just a little. I could always pull the belt out, but in this case, make it nice and snug. Sometimes I really enjoy just doing the straight modeling as opposed to sculpting. I love sculpting, don't get me wrong. It's super fun. But sometimes just hands-on on the model where you have direct control can be pretty rewarding as well. All right, pull this guy up. Oh, there you go. Oh. This is probably going to be back not flared as much forward as I put originally because the cloak is going to be weighing it down, right? The tabard. But it might also be pushed forward a little because of the underlying geo there. And we'll just taper that in just a tad. And eventually, after we like wind up unwrapping and starting to texture and whatnot, then we could go in and start to like wonkify, not like Willy Wonka, but like a wonky pass kind of thing where you go and you'll take stuff and you'll make it less symmetrical and kind of mess it up just a little intentionally to give some character. But usually save that for later. Okay, with this, let's see. going to add another cut here and kind of pull this out. It's like a fold. And we'll probably wind up doing a lot more of this afterwards too, like I just mentioned, because it becomes easier later on too. You could texture in all the folds and stuff you want, and then you could kind of chop them up afterwards. That way you get a little more bigger level of control. So you just paint and not have to worry about matching the geometry, and then afterwards edit the geometry on top. This needs to be a lot closer to his neck. I'm going to follow my guide there. Go ahead and push this down. It's not going to be as visible anyway. Sometimes it takes a lot of back and forths too to end up where you're eventually going to, where you want to end up. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an iterative process, right? You're going to do one thing, and then you're going to look back at a previous part of the model and be like, okay, that's too thin, like with the neck here. Maybe that's not too, or maybe that is too thin, pardon me, and you want to bulk it up a little. I do realize that I'm looking in the concept here at the chin strap rather than the actual neck there. So I'm kind of referring to something that isn't there anyway. Also, don't feel that you can't deviate from the concept either, especially if it's your own concept, or especially if it works better in 3D one way versus another, or if you're doing someone else's art for practice, imbue your own taste in it. Just be like, okay, you know what, I want this dragon to have 3 tails, and each of those tails is going to have a tail because, that's what I'm into. So that's perfectly fine too. Okay, so that's fitting a little better. I'm going to thin this out just a tad. And same down here. Give a little more breathing room for us to be able to see the straw parts. And before we add any thickness to it, let's get the back of it in there too, right? So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to duplicate. Oh, not yet. Yeah, sure, why not? Duplicate it. I'm going to put my pivot on the end point of it, and then I'm going to flip it. So we're on blue here, so it should be Z. There we go. So we could probably get rid of those actually, and then pull this back to this guy's back. All right, let's go ahead, start conforming this. I'm gonna use the snap tool on the verts just to line those up, and then we could start fitting it a little better afterwards. But let's get the back in there proper. And then there's going to be stuff that doesn't match. Let me move this concept a little further back. Still want to be able to see it, but can't get in my way. All right, so some stuff like this, right? I probably want this to be a lot higher. No real neckline there like the other one. So just a mixture of like connect, weld, and cut right now. Conforming this guy to what we'd like him to be. Same thing in the back. In the back, I want to be a lot shorter. Actually, maybe not. Maybe we'll leave it. However, it is the same for the straw. Round it out a little. Now here's where we can go in and combine them and then add some thickness. So first I want to merge those verts, right? We got 29, boom, 25. Now let's add some thickness. If we want to edit it later, it might be easier to delete the thickness and then edit and then try again. But in this case, let's go ahead and add it. So I'm going to select the edges, extrude. Undecided if I want to do an inside face yet. It's probably best if we do. Yeah. Let me undo that. And if we do it on object level, then we'll get those inside faces. And then we could always go back and delete the ones we don't see. Now we get that chunkiness to it, which I really like. Gives things a more depth, more feeling. More form is the important thing too. You're getting a feel of, okay, this has thickness. And I know something like tabard might not generally have thickness, so we might go back and thin it out, depending on how we feel once we get a little further with the model. I like the idea of it having a little bit of thickness. Again, might be a little much right now, but let's decide when we get a little further along. Okay, another thing I'd like to see that we might do after we texture as well is the little stitching, like having it pop out a little. I think that'd be a cool little addition to the model. But we'll get back to something like that. So let's get the hat on there a little better. I think the hat looks a little silly right now. Also, I'm going to probably thin this out just a tad. Be aware of selecting the back face stuff. Okay. Hat-wise. It's kind of a lot. I kind of went heavy on the amount of polys there, huh? Let's get it in the right spot. Over his head. Centered. There we go. I like to freeze transformations when it's centered. And then maybe have it lean back a bit. I'll see the kind of the bottom of it. All right, now for the sake of visualizing, I'm going to put in a couple X's. That way we can see it a little better where it's going to be. We might not keep it, but we'll have it there to see. Adding stuff like this will help you get your proportions a little closer. Just basically putting stuff in at all, blocking it out like the rest of it, will allow us to adjust things in relation to one another. So being able to see it a little better, faster, is only going to help us along. Because this is something I plan to have textured in. Okay. The mouth. Probably going to do something similar. Take these. Then, last but not least, tongue. Diphthong. Which I just like the look of it. I don't know if it makes sense at all. It might be drawn on. That's something we're going to have to figure out. I know it doesn't make sense, but I just like the personality of it. Okay. That helps us visualize that. I'm going to separate those real quick. And let's put in the chin strap thing. So for that, thinking, let's do that as a plane first as well. We could do it using part of the cylinder here. We'll grab that, detach it. Okay. Works for me. Get rid of those. In roughly the right spot. Yeah, thin it out a little. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align my pivot to the edge by holding D. And then you see the word align. I'm going to click the edge. Now I can just slide it along that. Boom. And there we go. And I want to do that little chin strap thing too there. So first I'm going to pull these in. And eventually I'll make like a little connecting part, maybe on the outside. So maybe I should pull those out. Come to think of it. We'll mess with it a little more. It's up. Now this handle, I want to be a little more cylindrical. So I'm going to go ahead and just ring select, add another loop, and then scale it. And these ones we could kind of scale down. Something like this will probably symmetry again as well before we unwrap it, or as part of the unwrap. But for now, just trying to get the model in place. And then from there, keep going. There we go. Just gonna thin out the end of it there. To accomplish that, I'm just using the transform tool, which I believe is in mesh tools or edit mesh. Let's see here. Mesh. Transform. So edit mesh transform, and you can move along normals like that. So sometimes it's nice for making kind of difficult off-kilter scales. So if something's on an axis or tilted, it'll move along the normal. So I kind of put it on my hotbar up here. Have that rest on his chest a little. Makes a little more sense than it floating. I mean, you could have stuff. It's it's 3D art, right? You could fake whatever you want. If I can have something making more sense and it doesn't take a lot of effort, I'll try to, especially the way it's constructed. Pardon me. I'll try to do that, especially for sculpting and stuff. Just try to make things as real as they could be constructed if we were to make them in real life. So let's see here. I'm going to add some thickness to this. Pull it out a little. Try to pull it in. I like the idea of it being on the. You know what? We'll play with it. Right now, I'll pull it in. As you say, I like the idea of a little steel thing on the outside edge of it, like a connector part. Anytime you have things intersect, if you just have like a little connection, a grounding element, could usually help sell the connection. Like for the arms, when I add some like hay or whatever straw coming in between, it'll kind of just, with your mind, it makes it make more sense than if it was just stuck in with nothing. It's kind of like if you are modeling a tree and you put it in the ground, you're gonna sell it a little more if you have some grass, like down here. This thing, perfect example, sticking into the ground. Would look kind of bland without anything there, but you put a couple grounding elements around it, it feels a little more natural. Okay, that's what is essentially the center one. All right, and so for that, this thing, I was gonna make it a little more cylindrical, but you know what? I think it's fine as kind of rectangular there. And what we can do instead maybe is just build it right into this. Nah, you know what? Let's do it in here instead. So what I'll do, I'll use this model, duplicate that face, branch it off. And then just build it there. So it'll be a little wonky, but in this case, I think it's going to be fine. If things aren't perfect, that was a hard thing for me to overcome in 3D modeling. You want every shape to be kind of like perfect, if that makes sense. Like no weird sloppy angles. But a lot of times you wind up adding that stuff back in later anyway, so it doesn't hurt to let it be a little off. And visually, you can generally put stuff back into the right spot pretty quick. It's not going to be like 100% in the perfect spot, right? But enough that if someone looks at it, it's not going to look like, way off and wonky and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and bridge these parts. With the exception of the hat, which we might make a little lower poly later, depending on how we feel, I don't feel the need to put in a lot of bevels everywhere. Normally, I like to put bevels, but we'll do that in the texture. So like this having a little more light hit it, we'll do all that by painting it in. There we go. And then that I want to fit into there. Trying to decide whether or not it should just be on one side or the other. This isn't so thick, but let's see. Let's see what we can do. It makes more sense than this being at an angle, right? Because it's going to be coming from the bucket, so we'll just move that stuff into place. And the fun thing about things that you're just kind of hand painting and doing diffuse only or very simple lighting is that the model doesn't necessarily have to be super perfect because it's the texture that's going to be doing the legwork. So in a lot of cases, you don't have to worry if something's like kind of off. Like I was saying earlier, it kind of plays into it, which is nice. But you gotta do what you're comfortable with too. If you want to make sure your model is like dead on in all cases, nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it's a time thing. Okay. Deciding if I want to put like a secondary little plug here. For it to fit into. You know what? Nah. We'll keep it low. I like the idea of it being pretty low. Maybe it could round out. Good news is, since we're not baking anything, it's really easy to edit afterwards too. There's a lot of benefits to doing art this way. It might not be like super next gen, but it has its own charm and a quite different workflow that is enjoyable in its own right. We'll go ahead and we'll merge all this to one piece. And I'm actually, since it kind of goes away right there, I'm going to pull this out, get a little more roundness out of here, a little more definition. Because if we're going to have an edge loop there, we might as well have it do something. It wasn't doing much being that close. Something to be mindful of, especially if you have intersecting parts and you have geometry in them. If you're never going to see it, right, then there's no point in having it there. So I'm kind of sneaking this closer to the edge. One step closer. And getting more out of those polygons. Still want to feel really round though, so I should kick it out a bit more. All right. Now let's go ahead and duplicate that. Make sure our pivot is centered. Might be a little, it looks like he's wearing like earrings or something. So I might only have it on the inside, even though it might not make sense. I'm gonna have to look at some reference and decide how I want to handle that. I think that's pretty funny, that I can't help but see it as like some earrings. And it's also much wider than I had in the concept. So this is one of the cases of put something in and then it'll help you to decide, right? I'm gonna separate that. Maybe we'll scale this in a bit. I believe this is also much longer than I have in the concept, so we could also try pushing this forward. By using that same tool from before, transform tool. Pop that up a little. Same thing here. I don't know if the tool's going to work in this case though. No. But we can still align it to the edge. So we'll continue to kind of polish this and get it into the right spot. For now. Yeah, I might want to edit that a bit. But we'll keep going. Figure out what we want. This definitely feels too smooth for me. So in the meantime, I'm just going to harden edge and then probably do another variant where it's a little less poly intensive. It just feels out of place with the rest. I like having the smoothness, so we'll think about it, but it doesn't quite fit the smoothness of the rest of it. So poly density and uniformity, depending on what you're shooting for, but it makes sense to have something kind of a even polygonal distribution as far as the shapes go. It's kind of weird for one thing to be super smooth and the rest of it to be kind of more faceted, if that makes sense. So we'll probably take a look at that too. But in the meantime, make sure that you save before we continue. All right, let's remake this hat here. This bucket. So what are we at now? We are at 1, 2, 3, 4, 16. So maybe we go down to 12 or 16. Okay. Maybe we want to go back. We want to go and take it down to 12. So let's see if there's a way we can just repurpose this for one. Maybe straight to a little, we'll just do it manually. So okay, go ahead and plane. I'm going to snap it for a reference. Now, mesh, or is it modify, snap together tool. I feel like this needs to be a little longer. It's going to be different proportions to the other one, very slightly. But the point being was I wanted a little lower poly for the whole thing. And this was just, it was feeling too smooth. So I felt the need to address that. Not for everyone, but in this case, I wanted to make the change. But one other thing we want is to put in the bucket strap thing here. We want that. But I wasn't really happy with that shape. So let's go ahead and we're going to start from one of these. Probably half of it. You know what? I'm probably going to go ahead and give this one more subdivision just to round it out a little, you know? So where these things connect, I'm just going to go ahead and let's see, make a little mini connection point. Just enough to sell it. You know, nothing crazy. Combine this into one. And let's go ahead and try it on. Might have to obviously make some adjustments after seeing it in the spot. Like for example here, I might go ahead and like thin it out a little. That kind of thing. Okay. Now let's put it on the head. I'm gonna raise it in place and then rotate it. And that way if I have to change it back, I can, and it'll be fine. Okay, seems to be looking good. Chin strap's going where I want it. Looks like it's connected. It's not going too far down. I might have to make it slightly bigger. Probably just scale it up. Otherwise, it's pretty close there. I do want to widen the front, though. There's not a lot of room for his eyes, huh? So there's a couple ways we could do that. Might just try scaling them out. See how how it looks. Not a huge deal if it's not perfect. Or we can make a cut in between. Let's try that out. So we'll go back to how it was. We'll just make an in-between cut. Okay, I should have went all the way. Okay, let's get rid of those. Boop. Same thing on the other side. This way, we get the curvature in the correct place still. Is this gonna work? Well, it worked for one side. Boom, boom. We can just use fill hole for up here. Okay. Start doing like more wonky passes and stuff too as we get a bit closer. There he has a little more room to breathe. And now if we want, we can just cap these points. Go ahead and connect them. You can put them anywhere. You don't have to do both either if you don't want. You just do the one. Same difference. Okay. Rotate this. Make it a little bigger. That's feeling a lot closer to what I had originally imagined. So might need to scale it down just a tad, but we'll play with that more later. So let's continue on. A couple small changes first. This thing, I don't want to protrude out as much. And maybe a little thinner. This is kind of the nitpicky. You don't have to, it's like all preference at this point for changes like this where I'm like, do I want to keep it to what it was in the concept or do I want to slightly change, like that kind of stuff. It's like, well, what do you feel? And you might change your mind again later. Okay. Right here, I'm just going to give him a little more around his face. Maybe we'll grab that and bevel it. Okay. That stuff is all going to be drawn on, so we don't have to worry about the X's and whatnot. Okay. So compared to the old head, not a huge difference, but big enough of a difference that this level of density is just overkill. This isn't too far different, and in fact, it's more in some places, but it feels more in line with the rest of it. Like it just feels like it fits better. The helm on them. Probably wind up scaling this down a little. We'll play with it more as we go on. Let's see. Might attach that stuff later, all this. We'll see how we feel. Once the shape gets a little more nailed down, then we can just say, okay, let's combine them, save some texture space. So this one, go ahead and delete. Delete. I'll keep the backup ones for fun, just in case. I like to keep them for a file or two, iteration or two. Now that we've redid the helmet, basically bringing it to a little lower poly just to match the look, not necessarily because we have a polygon budget in this case, but just to get it a little closer to the rest of the density. But let's go on now and continue with the rest of the model. So right now I'm thinking, let's see, let's add a handle to the back of this guy, and we'll try to fit this stuff onto the arms too. Same with the sword. We'll add like the rope that we want on there. So let's start with this guy. So let's hide some of the rest of this stuff. Our backup. Go ahead and hide this too. Just kind of using the layers right now. All right. So in this case, I did a sketch earlier on of how I wanted this to connect. So I'm just going to use that as reference. And let's make like a cube or a plane, something to start this with. I'm going to use a plane. We're going to center it by snapping to vert. Turn wireframe mode there. So let's pull this up, make sure it's even. So I'm going to hold V, middle mouse, drag. All right, it's centered. Now let's get this thing in place. I should probably have snap to it. So remember, when you rotate, if you hold J, it's going to turn snapping on. So I can have it be completely vertical. Usually we'll move things, out of being like perfectly up and down and stuff like that. But to start, I don't see any harm in keeping it that way. So I'm going to add some divisions here. And we're going to have to fit this around the arm. But for now, let's just do a kind of generic way of it looking how we imagined. And we'll add the thickness later. Right now, we're just going to go for the look. Basically, the core shape, right? Which was kind of like a door handle or like a cabinet handle type thing. Just a regular handle. I don't know. And we know it's going to fit around his arm, which is a cylinder. So might as well start feeling that shape out and get close to what we imagine it's going to need to begin with. Get some room. Okay. It's in the center there. Put it right up against there. And let's unhide his arms. I'll have to redo the layers soon. Just make them a little more organized for my needs. But in this case, select what we need, hide everything else, simply by just isolating these. Now, gonna freeze transforms on this. That way I could kind of reset it back to this. Or what we can do is combine these. We don't necessarily need to. Well, let's keep them separate for now. And we'll make an instance. So duplicate special, move these over. And so now anytime we edit either one of these, it's going to edit both, right? It's instances for us. Super useful and friendly. So I'm going to grab both of those. And now we're just going to kind of fake this into place, just to make sure the proportions are correct. Now in this case, it's not nearly enough room, right? This is going to have to float further back here, even if we rotate it a bit. So let's get it to where he might hold it, right? It might be kind of on his arm a decent amount. And that's kind of really big, right? So first, I might make both of them slightly bigger, which we'll have to do again after, because the instance doesn't do object level scaling. It'll do the sub-object level, but not this. But we'll do that, and then let's pull this bad boy out. Now we're still in object mode. Okay, so it should come out straight. There we go. Scale it up a bit. So it's a tight fit. We can round it out a little more if we want, but I'm going to use the geo we already have. And now I'll add that thickness to it. We'll go inwards. And then since it's dark there, that means our normals are inside out. So we'll just select and flip that back. Reverse normals. There we go. So I might have to make this straight on there. We'll see. I was going to say, otherwise maybe it feels like, I get caught up in stuff like this sometimes where I'm like, oh, does it look like it's going to slip off of the dummy? On one hand, it's like, who cares? But another part of me is like, oh, just change it a little and see if that works. So change it just a tiny bit. I'm sure it'll be fine. There we go. And we can always scale this up a tad too. And then of course get rid of the insides because never plan on seeing those. There we go. All right, well, that fits around his arm. Does the shield look a little big? It does. That's the thing. Now we're kind of it's one of the moments where it's like, okay, this doesn't exactly follow the concept here. So what can we do? Well, one thing is that don't really care about the concept as far as it being the number one like rule, right? It doesn't have to be. But also, maybe we could just try finagling it around a little. Like maybe I kind of like it angling back. Now that I think about it, one, I already did it. Don't have to do any more work. No, so one, I like how it looks like it's actually slipped on there because the arm is angled like that, so it makes sense for the entire thing to be angled, right? It doesn't really make sense for it to be straight up unless I re-angle the arm. Another thing we could do is thin out the arm, and then we'd be able to make that smaller. Or we could just say, hey, maybe the handle's really big on this one because they made it right for that guy. But I actually kind of like it like that right now. Kind of want to angle it maybe towards the outside a little. So one thing I'm going to do here is go ahead and combine these. So I think that looks pretty good there. I think I remember scaling these up, so I'm going to do it here too. We can see, let's see how much. This one 1.139. That's okay. It doesn't need to be exact. So I'll make it a little thicker, and then I'm going to combine these two. So combine. And now you see it got rid of our instance because the original object's no longer there. So that instance object is going to disappear too. Something to be aware of. Obviously, you still have your object here, but any rotation or scaling that you did on the instance is kind of lost. So you can undo it if you need those values, but otherwise, just be careful. So they're combined. I'm actually going to make another instance of it. Where are we going? Duplicate special. And now that they're combined, I can still make changes to it after, but now I can scale it and rotate it, and it'll kind of stick together a little better. So I'm going to kind of have it a little off kilter, like it's falling off a little, but that'll give it a little rotation as well. Get that nice thickness in there for those. And then I'm just going to pull these edges in a little so they're not floating out. There we go. It's gonna get a lot prettier when we texture it. Don't you worry. We could also, if we wanted, do edits like thin this out just at the end of it. Like maybe they designed him around holding it, or there's like a hole there that it slots in. So get creative with how you want to attach it. In this case, I'm just saying, they slipped it on there. It's not really something they paid tremendous amount of attention to. It did the job, right? I kind of like the angle of it though too. So one thing we might do later is that maybe this arm's a little lower than that arm, right? All those kind of tweaks we could be making a little later on. Let's see. I might scale it down just a tad. See a little more of the gap between his body and his arm. Cool. Make sure you save it. All right. Let's see. The sword now will want to get attached there. And right now it's just kind of floating, right? Let's move this guy over a little. Get at him. Yeah, my way. Rotate. We're going to need to play with these guys in a little too. They're really big right now. And I kind of like the size, but I want to just make a little room for the sword. The sword, scale down just a tad too. I don't believe this one is, yeah, that one's an instance too. Okay, cool. So in this case, like I was saying, if we scale in the sub-object, then the instance will properly change. Here, we can make this one smaller, and it didn't change this one, but we could still, on the sub-object level, of course, make those bigger changes if we want. So you could use, they're both tools, and they're both useful. Make use of those. Now here, what is our goal here, right? We want to tie the sword. I like when things physically make sense as much as I can. It doesn't always work out, and it really depends on a lot of factors. That's instance too. There we go. Boom, longer arms. Strength, agility. So giving a little more room to tie the rope on there, but I like the idea of having the rope tied on, because then it'll sell the idea of, oh, okay, he doesn't have hands. They could have made a hole in the arm and all that, but in this case, this poor guy, they're helping him out. They're giving him some help. So I'm gonna angle this back a little. Let's move the pivot point down here. Just gonna angle this back a little, or angle it forward. We could play with. Basically, I don't want it straight. We could tie it on there straight, but I'm just kind of thinking ahead of, like, maybe it's angled to the side, back a little or something. Might look cooler forward. So again, this is one of those things where it's like, play with it and feel it out and see what you prefer. For now, I'm going to leave it like that for the sake of tutorial so that we can move on. If you don't want to see it, fast forward 20 minutes now. All right, so let's add the rope. So in this case, I'm thinking of what might be an easy way to do it. And I think, honestly, just using a cylinder and then editing it after the fact. So we're just going to make a quick cylinder, and we only want the sides of it. So learning from our helmet, let's do 8 maybe. And then in this situation, it's a lot easier to add more. We don't need to be tied to the 8. It's just kind of a starting point. There we go. And then we're just going to move this in place. In this case, the rope is kind of going to be faked a little in terms of like, I'm just going to use 2 cylinder loops as opposed to making an actual knot. Sometimes I'll do that. It really depends on the level of commitment you want for whatever asset you're making. And importantly, if people are going to be seeing it. Because if people aren't going to see it, don't make it. Don't model it. Don't waste your time unless you know it's going to, later on, that someone's going to see it. You know, there's a lot of stuff in games, especially where you see this beautiful environment, and then if you get like free camera or something and you go around behind the mountain and it's just nothingness, and you're like, whoa. Like sometimes maybe you glitched out in a video game and you saw behind the curtain a little, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of nowhere. I remember playing there's a game called Primal on PS2, and I had gotten really far. It was this fun little adventure game, and I was getting close to the end, and there was a series of doors and rooms, and I go in one of them, and I'm like, oh no, wrong room, and I try to get back out, and my character glitched through the door, and all of a sudden the camera like zooms out a lot, and it's just all that exists is that room in the hallway, and there's nothing else, and you're just kind of like, whoa. But it's kind of fun. But the point is, if no one's gonna see it, don't bother. This is a little thick still. I'm gonna thin it out, and then it's clipping a little, but I'm gonna add thickness to it, so I'm not gonna really worry about it. And I think we're gonna do that by, well, first of all, let's put the other one in there. So I'm gonna duplicate that, and we're gonna use soft selection a lot here. I'm gonna separate these two. And okay, so I'm gonna add an edge loop there with our connect tool, give it some thickness, and then we can pull this inwards, and then we'll probably cap that off. And we're just gonna pull it a bit closer. This is one of those times where I'm kind of like, it could be thicker here, it could be thinner there. So use your discretion in this case. And something like this, all the edge loops don't necessarily need to be evenly spaced. It's just where do you need the definition. I'm just kind of using it here because that's what the mesh was originally. Give us a little more breathing room. And I'll cap these off. There we go. I like to bridge one first, and then I could bridge the rest of it. Sometimes it won't work if it's completely open. Bridge, there we go. That way it's not like see-through on one side. And if you want, we could actually go in, give it a little more thickness by adding another loop there. There we go. You could probably have it capped off. Depends, if this was in a game and you're not going to see it up close, just close it or leave it invisible. Depends, how far away you are. Okay. Soft select in here. Same thing with this guy. We're going to cap it. Bridge. Bridge. Okay. connect and scale. Now we got a thickness there. And so there's going to be some clipping here. You could take the time to go through and fix it, but since it's low poly too, it's kind of one of those things where you're never going to be like completely happy with it. So just kind of like could paint it into the texture, that kind of thing, so it doesn't look as low poly. But where we can, we'll fix it up. And again, if there's sections you need to add some geo, don't be shy. It's not gonna break the budget. So right here, basically, I'm just rounding it out and moving some edge loops over to where I think they do a little more for us. Just spending a little more time just getting the model in an area where I'm happy with it. But you could probably stop at any time. Don't need to get this detailed, but you want to be proud of what you're doing too. So strike a fine balance between them. And now I'm seeing this being a little too low res, so I might add one more connection there just to round it out slightly. Could have put it either in the front or the back, but there we go. And something like this too, we're going to get to the texturing phase, and since we're not baking anything, or at least we're not planning on baking anything for this tutorial, it's really fun and easy to edit your model afterwards, after you texture, or at least after you start texturing, because you can see like the results immediately. You're like, oh, okay, if I move that there, this is what I'm going to get out of that. Does that make sense? We'll get there. You'll see. You'll see what I mean, and you'll agree. It's a fun time. Okay, boom, boom. Let's get out of there. So immediately though, look how much more real that feels. What a weird word to use for low poly model, but like that's just kind of like glued to his hand, right? No kind of construction. But as soon as we put the rope there, even if it's very rudimentary, very kind of low poly, it's getting work done, right? It's like, oh, okay, visually I understand what's happening there. Like I get it. It's tied down. So that works. Okay, let's see. So we got the shield on there, and it looks like his hand's poking out a little, so we're gonna have to edit that since I pulled it outwards. There's plenty of ways we can handle it. Right now I'm just gonna kind of wanted some more space from his body anyway, so we got it. Thanks to the arms being slightly lengthened. We got the helm in a better spot there. Okay, the shoulder pads, we should probably give a little more attention to the shoulder pads, and then the neck, and then just tighten everything up a little, and I think we're ready to unwrap. So not quite yet, but we're pretty close. And then, like I said, after the texturing starts, or anywhere along the line, it becomes easier to like edit the model afterwards because you're understanding, okay, this is what I have to work with. And it looks fine even with the model like this because the texture's doing the work. So in this case, let's go ahead. We need to, the shoulder pads really kind of push this head up from where they could be, but I'm going to try to bring these down a little. And I think part of that is the thickness of them. I made them really thick, but I'm starting to second guess it. It's another thing that could be changed later, but we're here. Let's get it. Let's get it done. Yeah, I know I use like freeze transform in that a lot, but whenever you're rotating something and still kind of like editing it, it's good to leave all those transforms in there, because then you can use object space like this, right, where my manipulator is tilted to the same degree as the geometry itself, at least until you freeze those transforms. So this way we can do operations like this, which is handy. There's other ways to kind of recover it a bit, as well. As you might have noticed, I did snap it earlier, the snap together tool when we were rebuilding the helm. Stuff like that can be useful to realign your objects back to like perfectly vertical and stuff like that, but not always necessary to have. But it can be useful. Situations just like this. Maybe we'll angle shoulder pads out a little so they're not straight forward and back. A lot of that stuff, you kind of have to train yourself when you're modeling to put in the angles, right? To put in the wonkiness or just kind of things that aren't like perfectly straight or left or right. Because when we build it like that, it's easy to build it like that. But the life doesn't really show itself until we start editing all that stuff. So right here, just even adding an angle to the shoulder pads, right? They're facing straight forward and back because we built them like that. But giving him an angle like that, okay, maybe his fake dummy chest is big. It kind of can give that impression, even if it's not. But this also opens up breathing room where this was clipping before. And while it's not a huge deal, stuff like that, it can add up to just little changes in your geometry and the angles and how they all flow together. So with this guy too, I'm not completely sold on how his arms are built in, especially them being straight out to the side. I feel like for like a general like scarecrow-y type thing, it makes sense, but I'm tempted to pull these back and like rotate them, right? So his arms are kind of coming forward a little instead of just to the side. I think it would have a little more dimension that way, because right now he's very like straight along this angle, right? Along our our X on the grid right now. So let's see what we can do. Since they are instances, I'm just gonna head and challenge that. I'm gonna go back and we'll give him a little more of a back. I know he doesn't have or deserve real anatomy, but it might make it more visually interesting. As long as it still feels, like a dummy, that kind of thing. We want to preserve that. We don't want to make him look too real. Right? And I'm wondering if that's worth it. I'm gonna make should I make a clone? Just thinking might make a duplicate first, but we could always import it from a previous scene actually if we really want to get that back to how it was. So you know what? Yeah, let's do the changes here. Doing it live. Well, live enough. So we'll angle these forward. Just get back a little. We'll give him a little more fake shoulder muscles. All right, there we go. Now this. Just round out the body a little more, just like a person might be. And using soft selection just to kind of pull everything along with us. But just, getting that slight bean shape, even though he doesn't have a butt or legs or any of the rest of that. Okay. But we've made space for the arms now. The back. Cool. Now let's reposition these. It should still fit right in, but we're going to have to rotate it, right? I don't know how much we're going to have to rotate it, but until it looks right. How about that? How about that? There we go. And anytime along this, if we see geo that needs to be edited, we could do it without any problems because we didn't have to bake anything. So don't have to worry about those normal maps freaking out. Can you tell I'm excited about the low polyness? Wait, no normal maps. We're good. Okay, so that fits. Sorry. Fits that guy pretty well. World. Okay. And now this side, same thing. It's just going to be angled forward a little. And we want it to visually make sense. It's clipping a tad. I'm going to give it a little breathing room in the front. I don't want that area clipping. I don't mind the back clipping as much. Okay. Boom, boom. It has a little angle. That feels better to me. It's not, I know we didn't go ahead and do like crazy changes to it, but sometimes all it needed is a little. Until we change our minds later. So it kind of counters what we did here, unfortunately. But I think it could still work. Just kind of angling it slightly back to where it was. Might not need to, though. Okay. What's it look like on the other side? Let's add it there too. I'm going to pull this guy back slightly. And then we'll try adding the other shoulder pad back in. So now stuff like this, I might want to unify where the splits are for the chest and this. Like having them match each other will make it look a lot cleaner. It's something I should have done earlier, but I think I was distracted just getting all the pieces in there. So let's see real quick. Let's get our symmetry back on. And I kind of like the geo of the, what do we call it? The tabard better, or just like where it is. So we can kind of match that, I believe. I'm gonna go ahead and hide that, and maybe we will go see-through. Make sure I save it. Operation like this might have some risk. So saving it first, going back in, turn my symmetry on. Going into what's called multi-mode, so I can select faces as well as edges and verts all at the same time. So go ahead and make a cut there. I could probably get rid of the other cuts, right? Like this stuff. Let's do it to the back first. Okay. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to get rid of these triangles so that way I can just delete the whole loop at once. Get rid of that loop. Let's go back to regular mode. There we go. It's just going to fit it a little cleaner. And it's not something we had to do. In this case, I noticed it was kind of close. And I was thinking, okay, it might be easier if we just match it up in that scenario. It could kind of be the same up here too if we wanted, but I'm not going to go too much into it there because it's still getting the job done, right? Let's see. We could. We see now how the polys kind of, the edges are in the same area. And if I scale these out a little, it'll be even closer. None of this is necessary, but if you want to line up stuff geometry wise, so like, I mean, you could attach them if you wanted, but I just like where the kind of, you know how it's like hard edge, right, where you get this faceted look. If the facets match each other better, it just has a better feel. Wish I could use my words better. Me need word better. Good. But I hope that makes sense. So because if you're gonna have facets like that, if you match the parts together, it's gonna look more cohesive, more intentional. You know, within reason. It should be a beneficial thing to do. And since this is going to be low poly anyway, that we're just going to kind of paint over, yeah, having it match will make it easier to paint on too, I think. There we go. So this still has a little center thing here. I don't know if we need it. We could try. But this one has it there too, so maybe if anything, pull it out a little. But we'll see. This is another one of those things where once it's textured, we could be like, is that poly doing anything there? You know what I mean? Like, is that getting us anything? Clear the history a little. Let's mirror this just to get a bigger view of it. So I'm going to duplicate it. I'm actually going to freeze transforms of the duplicated one. You could use mirror symmetry to do this as well. I'm used to doing this in my workflow just because I've had bad luck with those tools kind of being aggressive and crashing the program on me. It's probably much better now in 2018 than it was in the past, but you kind of build that habit. I could probably try putting another symmetry up here though. There's probably one over here. This one. Yeah, mirror. Easy. We'll try it. We'll try it for fun. You could be here with me because I'm scared. Okay, now with the shoulders on, it kind of fills him out a little more. Still got to do some work on the neck. And all our face stuff is kind of temp. But it looks like a little dink like that. But once we put those on, it's like, whoa. I don't know if I want to mess with this guy, right? This guy has armor on. He's already dead and he's still willing to fight. I don't know. Those X's over his eyes, not convincing me. So back here, see, we're going to have to make a little more room, either by scaling it up or pulling his back in a little. We'll play with that. Maybe we could just push these back a little and probably scale them slightly wider. Or, if we want to be quote-unquote realistic about it, it is armor, it is heavy. It's probably going to weigh this stuff down to where it's going to, be pushed into him. His squishy body. Let's take a look at both of those. I know, I'm thinking the same thing. Didn't I just pull these out? There we go. That way it's not piercing through. And it's going to look fine. Again, if it's something we're not going to see, not as big of a deal. That can be deleted. Assuming it didn't bleed out to the sides where you could see the empty areas. But just something like that, yeah, you're fine. You're fine to do. I am, however, going to cut these, or connect them, just so I can get that curvature in there. Since it's so low poly, I want to force the triangle to kind of bend it a certain way. So you'll see me here and there put in triangles just to get it to bend the right way. There we go on the back. We could still split that a little later if we want. We'll add some grass. There's a bunch more to do, but we're getting there. We're getting there. The model's getting close. All right, now make sure you save it before we continue. All right, continuing on here. We're getting pretty close. So I mentioned a couple things I still want to basically get to and touch up and whatnot. One of those is going to be adding the little cuts in the sword, just so the geo has a little more detailed to support what I want to do. The grass planes, which are going to be really easy, we could just kind of block in to use as a guide for our texture space for where we want to put it, as well as the underside of this, which we can probably be fine doing that afterwards, but I'm going to block it in now just to have it back facing. And otherwise, well, we might want to do an under, because we got to make sure you can't see too far under this guy. For our purposes, we're mostly going to be taking presentation screenshots of it, which means the player, quote unquote, won't be able to see underneath for the most part. So as long as we make sure that they can't get under there, it should be fine. For our sake, we at least want the back face there. So from like a view like that, if we tend to go down there, we'll still see, the hay or whatever we decide there. So let's see, just pulling these out. Let's start with the grass planes, getting those in. So for these, I'm just going to make some planes. Just like that. That's honestly good enough. When you paint in, you might want to finesse the shape a little to take up less UV space if you want. It depends, what kind of grass shape you want. In this case, I'm just going to leave it pretty square. I know these are probably going to be like triangular patches of grass, so I'll just mock up something like that. And then we'll just put a couple here or there. Again, if anything, just to get them represented. And then after we texture it, we can go in and add some cuts and add slight bends and stuff like that. Well, maybe we do it now so we remember, just in case. So in the case of this one, maybe I want it to bend forward slightly, right? Something like that. Just enough for us to remember. And this one might bend back a little, give it a little more dimension. This is something that we can go over and spend a little more time on when we get to this point. But for now, it can serve as a kind of reminder for us that we want to do that. And these planes, in the meantime, will take up space on our UV map, and it'll tell us like, oh yeah, I wanted to paint grass here, that kind of thing. Not very fancy looking, I know. But once we paint some stuff in, it should look a little more attractive. All right. Next, I'm going to add, I think I'm going to add the bolts to this thing. I want them to stand out just a little. There's just a couple there for fun. We'll see if we follow the concept exactly or not. But in this case, I'm just going to make some cylinders. Maybe like just 5 or 6 sided. Pop them in these spots. Another option you have for something like this is to texture them first and then model them out, which is something that we can consider. This one I think we're going to wind up doing symmetry on anyway. Let's see. I know right now I have these things, what's it called, instanced. So it should be fine. Like adding models for stuff like this sometimes, because having the silhouette break makes the model feel a lot higher fidelity, which could add a nice feel to it. I zero out my rotations there so I get this guy flat again. And then I can align him, just vertex align him. So he's right in the middle. That way I know it's in the right spot. There you go. That way I can mirror that right in half. Typically, you probably didn't have to mirror that one so much as the shield itself, but I get it aligned there, so why not? Okay. Back on there. Got these things. They're looking in the right spot. Okay, the other thing we wanted to do was the sword, right? Let's cut in a couple pieces. This is another thing that you could theoretically texture first, but it's a simple enough thing that I'm just gonna put it in. So I'm just using connect a couple times to make this kind of hole, this kind of cutout. Now this one we're probably also going to mirror front to back. But I don't necessarily want to add another cut all the way, so we might just mirror the front of it and then do the side as unique and then just try to match up the texture. So that way we don't have to add all those polys. It's not a lot, but sometimes it's a trick I use when I want to keep the polygon count a little lower. There we go. Cut out just a little. That one looks a little big now that I see it in 3D, so I might angle it a little differently. Cool. Cool. Now the rest of this, keeping it kind of wonky intentionally. There we go. Okay. Now we could do the same thing for the helm that we kind of did here. In this case, might just reuse those. We'll see. We'll see how I feel. This is one of the cases where it's doesn't come out enough really to justify, but since it's on the head, it might be something that we want to add like little bumps of. So I'm going to texture it flat, I think, and then we'll see how it looks. I might just make a little plane, poke the face, and just raise it out. So that way you create the little bumps along the way. We'll see. That's something we want to feel. Last thing here is going to be the cutout on the helmet, similar to the sword that would kind of like cut up. And in this case, I'm trying to think. I want to handle that. So I want to keep everything symmetrical, so I might unwrap it first and then do that. We'll see. Or I might just do it on both sides, actually. This should be symmetrical, right? So let's save it first. Object X. There we go. Would that be right here? Let's just test it out. Nothing crazy right now. Kind of just feeling this out. If I want to do it or not. I like the idea of having the silhouette broken just a little bit, as if the planks are separate. That's pretty cool. I'm going to lower these a bit by snapping to that edge, pull them down. Same with back here. These ones I might just go ahead and weld. Same thing, I'll snap to the edge so I know the plane is proper. And then weld here too, assuming it doesn't break. The normal's got a little wonky, but that's not too bad. We'll just harden them again. Okay. So this is all like taste stuff right here too. It's stuff you can do afterwards. I'm just kind of having fun with it for now, trying to think through like, okay, do I want to do that, etc. Now we got this thing that we're gonna have to embed in the hat a little more than it is now. I'm just gonna lower it. I know we have that view from the concept where it's higher. I don't think it's gonna kill us to pull it down though. And then we'll double side that too. That one won't really have much thickness, but it's also kind of like a leaf slash feather type thing. I think I'd go with a leaf. And we could always cut down the middle too to give it some depth. So let's go ahead and do that, just to give it a little bend. I'm going to go ahead and cut. Using the multi-cut tool all the way through the end. Kind of did something weird at the end there. I think it's because I had symmetry on. And now I'll just grab these middle ones and pull them out. Give us a little depth. Doesn't have to be much. Again, kind of personal taste. Another thing we could feel out later. So let's go ahead now and couple other things that I have my eyes on. One think I'm going to raise up these just a little, as well as the chin strap. Getting kind of anal. Don't really have to be for this thing, but it's just something I noticed, and I was just like, oh, might as well. Pull that up just a little. And then same with this thing. He's a little closer to his chin over there. Kind of liked the gap between the helm and the shoulders a little more too that we had in the drawing. Okay, now with the face, I want to basically do a couple things. One, let's see what's on these layers again. Right. Okay. One, I want to thicken the neck a lot. I kind of want to have this all merged down into it instead of it being a post like that. I'm kind of undecided because I drew it as a post in the concept, and now I'm like reevaluating, and I'm like, okay, do I want to have it be all one sack, one piece, or do I like having the post there? And I think it makes more sense for it to be one piece, but part of me likes the idea of like this wooden post going through his neck. Let's just round this out a little more. There we go. Make sure you save. And then this, I might maybe just scale it up. So we don't have to get rid of it as it is. We'll scale it up a bit and we'll see how we do with that. Okay. Now, pretty close to being ready to unwrap. I'm going to try to add the split back here and see if I like it or not. So I'm going to duplicate this just so I have a backup one. Hide that, and then let's cut this. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to go ahead and bevel this edge until I get the width of that I want. I think something like that. And then we'll just use these verts. I'll align to the edge that they're on so it stays the right spot. Say, okay, how much do we want that split? So maybe that much. And then I'll add another connect. And you can either pull this up, let's see if this works, or we can delete what was there. And we'll just go ahead and weld. There we go. In addition to that, I'm just going to widen all these down here and have it flare out a tad. Makes it a little different from the front side too. It's a little bit of variety, so if people, or if they turn the model around, or if you're taking pictures from the other side, get a little variety there. Okay. I like the idea of it coming outwards. I'm trying to decide if it's worth the silhouette. But you're not going to see it too much, so maybe if I pull it out more. And we can do stuff like that afterwards. So we'll definitely do like a pass afterwards to like mess up the model a little. Okay. So we still got the face, but I think a lot of the stuff is going to be just directly in the texture. This is just so we can see kind of where that stuff is at. Might put the the tongue in separately, but let's just go ahead and just look around one more time real quick. I'll try that mirror out. Let's see if the defaults work. Oh, ooh, ooh. All right, worked just fine. Did it crash? No, I think we're good. Charge off world. So it did keep them in one, so we could always split those if we want. So I'll just go ahead and detach. All right, and then I guess we could go in and start putting what's it called, smoothing groups. I guess hard and soft edges on these, so that when we bring it into like 3D Coat, we'll have those, and we can use those to do basic bakes. We can do those just to make sure the model looks a little nicer. So here, one thing you can do is automatic soften harden, which I believe is in mesh display, soften hard edges, and then you got the dialog box. You could set the angle. So we'll see how this did. So it's just going to automatically smooth it or not, depending on the angle between polys. So in this case, it worked pretty good for the most part. Up here, angle's getting a bit much, so it didn't smooth. So we'll go in and manually choose those. I do recommend hotkeying these too. Can definitely help save some time if you're using smoothing groups a lot, at least. All right. The rest of it is looking pretty good. Okay, this looks good. Oh, sneaky boy up here. Soften these. And that one could stay hard down there. All right, the rest of that looks fine. Let's go on to the body, same thing. This one we could just probably soften the whole thing, unless we really need a hard edge somewhere, which I don't believe so. Here, soften, and then go ahead and get the top and bottom there. This we could feel safe to get rid of the back stuff, because we're never going to see it. We don't want to waste the UV space. The rocks are kind of tricky because on one hand, they're faceted. On the other hand, they're not faceted like that necessarily. So we could paint it all in. If there's some we want to cut in afterwards and get like hard edge stuff, that could work pretty well. There you go. I made an instance of that. That way you only have to unwrap one of them. Let's see how this looks. Harden. That could work. We could probably keep this one soft, but try it. Let's try it like this. A lot of times it just becomes a lot of trial and error to see if you want one result over the other. Because a lot of things could really go either way. Making sure I got rid of that stuff on the bottom. We could probably attach this, but I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it separate. We'll waste a little UV space having the underside there, but in this case, I like the idea of having it a little separate. Okay, so now we got the smoothing groups on there, and we could see the form of like the lighting and everything we're gonna get. That's pretty good. And then we'll go after that and start unwrapping. But before that, I'm going to show you one thing I like to do for fun every now and then when working on a model. Let's see, which one is this on? So I'm going to grab all these and add them to the same layer. I'm just going to call this Geo. That way I have my guy all on one. This can be on instances. However you organize this is totally up to you too. This is just how I'm feeling at the current moment. Layer 3 was a backup of that one, but we also have that in an old file of ours, so we're good with that there. And then I still haven't decided if I like it or not, but we can make it work. We'll make it work. Speaking of which, let's widen it a little more. Maybe the opposite. Ooh. We don't want that wider. No, I mean, I like what. But we'll see. We could finagle this more later too. I don't want to get into this little nitty gritty of things that don't really matter. Okay, so is there anything left on this layer? If not, let's clean it up. This layer, tell whether or not it lets you select objects. So it's saying select objects looks like it's just a legacy transform. So sometimes when you get this kind of stuff, I usually delete history before deleting them because sometimes it will like make something that you have like jump to another location because the information's stored in like these little transforms. But in this case, everything looks like it stayed in the right place. So I'll delete that. This one, I believe, is the concept. That's right. So I'm just going to name that one concept. We'll keep that one around. And we have some backup stuff that I have in a previous iteration of this file. And so, you know, it was in 05. I'm in 06 right now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these. And if we need them, we can always go back and import them from our previous file, just so we keep this a little cleaner. Delete that layer. And now you see I have a bunch of these things that I was pointing out a minute ago. Let's just get rid of those. As long as nothing moves, you're good to go. And we can name the stuff before we bring it into 3D code. But for now, what I like doing for fun is just add some lights. Just it helps me see what we've made a little better. So I'll go create lights, maybe either a point light, spot, or directional. In this case, I'll just do like a spot and a point. So we created that, and we'll move it, scale it up a bit so we can see it. Now this is just purely for fun. This is something I enjoy doing, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. And there's nothing really fancy or special about this. So now that we have the light in the scene, we need to make sure we toggle on lighting, which is this button up here. And then boom, immediately now we could see that light being the dominant light in the scene. So let's change a couple controls here. Boop. That's not the one I was looking for. So let's see, drag. I like using the controls right here. You should be able to just click and drag them. I think I'm being silly about it though. I guess we'll have to type it in this case. It's being goofy. All right, let's do it. That will widen it up, so that way it's not as, there we go. So if you click it and then middle mouse in the middle of the scene, you'll be able to control it a little easier. I was trying to do it directly on the numbers, which I'm pretty sure you can in most cases, but it was capping out at like 3. So it depends what values it's accepting. In this case, we'll have the angle big, and this is, I believe, like the softness, or that's a drop off. Let's see. There we go. And so what I like to do is I like to just put like a couple just generic lights. Let's see now. Let's do a point light. Put it on the back side of him. Now we'll set this one pretty low. And let's give it a slight color. Why not? And then I'll do one more just to fill that in. And we'll make that really, really slight. Now you can get as creative with this as you want or don't want, but I find this to just be a fun way to look at the model in a slightly different light and to give you slightly different light, and to give you an idea of when you do bring this in, if you choose to light it, even though we're going to be hand painting the textures. So a lot of times we prefer unlit, just so you could see everything you painted in its hand painted glory. But otherwise, you might want to add some lighting to it, to add a rim light or whatnot. So in this case, now we can turn on shadows. I believe it's this button here. And it gives it a lot more depth. Now ours is kind of goofy because we have these floating, the floating face here. I'll put that a little closer. There we go. So I don't know. I just think that's kind of fun. And if you want to get even wilder with it, you could put a point light behind him and really crank it to get like a rim light, right? So we'll take that intensity and now even just with some low poly models, it's kind of like a fun look to it, right? And so let's see, we could toggle. That was our default modeling, and now that's just kind of, a fun way to look at the form that you've modeled and made. And I enjoy doing that. Maybe you'll enjoy kind of playing with your model in such a simple way. But I think it's cool. Let's see, can we move we can. So now we could rotate that around. Whoa. We want to see it on the back side. You could just rotate the model too. I was just playing around there. I'll see the backside lit like that. But yeah, so I thought that was fun. I could grab all these now, put them on their own layer, which is called lights. And you can just toggle it off whenever you want. If you get rid of those and these buttons are still on, the light one, you're just going to see your silhouette, which is also very useful. So I think that's a pretty fun silhouette. Not gonna lie. So yeah, and remember, shadows make all the difference here when you're looking at it with the lights on. So that's cool. I'm gonna toggle those back off. I'm gonna make sure I save it, and then we'll get going with some unwrapping.